Hi, I'm Laura,
And I'm Kate.
and this is What the Buzzword. Today we're going to talk about transparency,
We have it taped on the wall.
just in case you forget while we're talking about it. Uh, I guess we should just jump right into it.
Yeah.
I think this really started, this conversation between us started after you got me hooked on Newsroom.
Newsroom is a fantastic show.
It talked about being a more informed voter, and I felt like that aligned so well with being a well-informed consumer.
Mhm.
And that happens a lot nowadays because we have so much access to information. And I found it really important to see brands that are, being really transparent about what their processes are.
I feel like a lot of people talk about being transparent, but they're not actually being transparent. And it's because it's very easy to understand it from a very theoretical perspective. The more transparent you are, the more honest you are, the more people are going to like you. But how do you actually be transparent as a brand? I mean, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that you don't necessarily want your audience or your consumers to know about. So how do you find the right balance?
Definitely brands try to stay away from anything negative, but you also have to take into consideration that, dirty laundry eventually gets exposed.
And everyone actually has dirty laundry.
Yeah. Would you rather it be that you owned up to it before someone else found out about it, or were you in the process of hiding it all over these years and then you have someone come in and expose it all?
So let's talk about Target and what happened. What was that, about a year ago?
Yeah, so they had that huge data breach. I feel like they reacted pretty quickly in terms of letting the consumers know what had happened. Target took it to another level, though, that I really admire in terms of what brands can do in terms of reacting to these sort of situations, where instead of just saying that this happened and acknowledging that it happened and then not doing anything about it, they said this happened. Here are the steps. We're hiring a chief information security officer. We're going to take these steps to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Right.
And they expose that kind of information at the risk of them, at the risk of it harming their brand image. And what better brand would I want to align myself with than one that's willing to sacrifice themselves so that my, security, my information is put before their own, brand image.
I think that tracks back to just basic human to human interaction. If you mess up and do something wrong, if you hurt a family member or a friend, just owning up to it and having a very direct, honest conversation, not being defensive, not making excuses, but just owning up to it, you can still repair that friendship.
Right. If you think about it, we can say as much as we want to say, but it doesn't mean anything until you actually do something.
Right.
So, my friend talking to me about it and then, saying that they're going to do something, but then their behavior never changing and it's always staying the same. That's like the failed relationship. Such a cliche, end to a relationship that.
I'm really curious, speaking of just from a relationship humanistic standpoint, what we learned about, or whenever the whole Amazon thing came out a few months ago. There's this wonderful brand who's changing the world, who seems to have a lot of great love and following, but maybe internally they're not as transparent as they could be. There were a lot of issues that came out from that employee regarding roles being completely burnt out, a lot of nasty politics. Some of that is you take it for a grain of salt, you don't believe everything you read, but it also, I think, is an example of how your organizational structure and how you treat employees, that stuff actually matters as well, and being very transparent about it. I thought Amazon handled it well in at least addressing or responding to it, but it does have an impact on that brand perception, right? Is that place really being run that way, and am I supporting that kind of treatment by supporting Amazon? It just plants that kind of question in the consumer's mind. So if you're not being transparent internally, then it's going to come out externally as well.
Right. It changes the perception of the end product. Even though, internally those behaviors probably don't affect what my shipment is from Amazon. But because I understand that about the brand and the company itself, it changes my perspective on, do I want to support that company? It's the same thing that happened with a lot of the big shoe brands like Nike when they were exposed for using child labor and so as great as that end product is, it matters what's happening internally too.
And I think we have access to that information now, unlike we've ever had before. So it's putting a lot more onus on the consumer to decide, is it just about the product and the service? Or do I really need to be questioning from like a moral standpoint what I'm actually supporting?
Right. I mean, the thing is, because those things have happened in the past, people are going to try to make sure they're more informed about a company before they actually support it. And so you have to understand that there are these like sort of detectives out there trying to find that information about you and expose it. So who would you rather find out? Have your customers find out that information from?
Right.
Would it rather be from me or from, from your own spokesperson who's saying we recognize these issues and we're gonna, address them this way? And I think that really feeds into the fact that it can't just be you talking about it. It can't just be you, releasing like a press release about it or a blog post. It has to be some sort of action afterwards, or it really means nothing. You're not really being transparent. Yeah. And there was another brand that we really Volkswagen. Yeah. I think they're a big example of how things can go really, really badly.
Right.
For them to openly deceive customers, because this wasn't a mistake on their part. This wasn't like a malfunction, like a data breach. It was a deliberate, malicious effort to hide something that directly affected the consumer. And I think another, big point to really focus on here is that the CEO, instead of just owning up to it and, talking about what the actions he'll be taking to make sure that this is reversed and that, the people who are responsible for it will be, punished in these ways, he's resigning. Yeah. And I know some people might view that as like an honorable thing to do, but from my perspective, it's that he's abandoning ship before it really sinks.
Right.
And, what I would rather see is a CEO or a leader really stick with the company through the process of, rebuilding after this sort of, negative.
And own up to the cover up even.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if he's just leaving, what?
I think there had to be some sort of demonstration of an example of we are sort of sorry and acknowledging that there's been fault here and that someone should be, quote, punished in some way.
And so they're going to sacrifice a CEO instead of saying, we're all going to come together as a company. We're going to rebuild, make sure that, we rebuild that trust and relationship with you as a consumer. Instead of, we fired our CEO.
We checked the box.
He was responsible for everything. And so now we've gotten rid of the problem. And now, we're back to the brand that we used to be. Right. And I love the article that Adweek did on it. They said that one thing ruined 50 years of great advertising for Volkswagen.
Right.
So as great as like everything in your past was, one thing can have the power to ruin all of it. And I think that says a lot for just like human relationships as well.
Right.
We can have a great friendship, but the minute that you do something that really breaks my trust, it's very difficult for you to regain it.
Right.
But the thing is, if you own up to it, that doesn't break that trust. It means that I can trust you even more to make sure that I know that you're going to be honest about things with me.
Right, and I think it's important to note that it's not about being perfect, because people aren't perfect and companies aren't perfect. We all screw up. So being transparent, it doesn't mean making the right decision all the time and letting everyone see that. It is openly being wrong and admitting to failure and admitting that we tried to fix something and we completely botched it.
I think no company likes owning up to it because they act, if you look at it, a company, at the core, it's made up of people. And I think we act on this like sort of like faux cover up of this like huge corporation, like just the building exterior is a company. But you look within it and it's people. It's made up of people who make mistakes and who have to learn from the mistakes so that you can't always make the right decision every time. And, just to make sure that people know about that, make sure consumers know it, because I feel like as much as the company has deceived themselves in terms of thinking about it that way, where they're just like a company, the consumers have come to think of it that way too.
Right.
Where a company is a perfect like robotic structure rather than like actual people within it.
Right.
So they're really transparent on all aspects.
And then asking yourself, is it about doing what's best for customers, or is it about preserving my power? And only one of those options is going to lead to long-term success.
Right.
The other may be short-term.
I think that wraps it up pretty well.
Thanks for joining us on What the Buzzword.